Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So I've got a lot of cards to catch up on today, including a few legendary, so let's get straight into it. And we're going to start with the Paladin class, because there's been a few cards released for Paladin. And the first one is a spell called Lightforge Blessing. It's a 2-mana spell, and it's actually got the twin spell effect. So remember, twin spell means when you cast it, you get a copy of the card back in your hand, so you can play it again. And this one only costs 2 mana, which means you can play it twice in the same turn. But whether or not you want to just depends on what minions you've got on the board, obviously. But the effect is give a friendly minion lifesteal. Now, if this was in a different class, maybe Rogue or Hunter, I would say this card's incredible. In Paladin, it's got really strong potential because I think having the ability to give any minion lifesteal is pretty huge. If you have a big taunt minion in the way, you can really heal up a lot, and being able to place it on there yourself, it means that you can play the minion, then if it survives, the next turn you could put this on there to guarantee that you get some lifesteal. Sometimes with lifesteal minions you could play them and then your opponent plays a Siphon Soul on it or something and you don't get any healing. Well, this kind of guarantees that you'll be able to get some healing. But Paladin does have lots of other good healing cards. There's Flash of Light, Crystal Smith Kangor, which would synergize with this, and also Sheer Valor. So it's kind of, do they really need this extra healing? Because Sheer Valor is really incredible. But I think potentially it could have a spot if there's any type of control Paladin that can hit the meta. Maybe even a mid-range Paladin, but I'm not too sure. I don't think they would want to spend 2 mana on just getting some lifesteal in that kind of a deck. I think this is more of a control Paladin deck card, and maybe we'll see some big strong taunts that you could put this on. But it's a really good card, and one which I think would be better in a different class, but does fit with Paladin. So let's see if they'd actually end up needing it. Next up is a secret called Never Surrender. This is really good, actually. I think it's a 1-mana secret, just like all the Paladin secrets are. When your opponent casts a spell, give your minions +2 health. Now, that's can be situationally very good, it can be awful. So your opponent can play around it, because if they clear your minions off of the board, then they cast a spell, this is absolutely useless. But if you've got a big board and your opponent decides that they want to do a board clear, this will trigger give your minions +2 health, and then they might actually survive the board clear, which actually is huge. If your opponent spends the mana to do a board clear and it doesn't work, that's huge. So this could kind of go really well into a mid-range Paladin deck, maybe a bit more of a Zooey Paladin deck, just to give your minions a bit more stickiness onto the board. Buff Paladin decks do like that kind of thing, giving minions extra health so that they survive longer for you to be able to put more buffs on it. So this is quite a cool secret, but it does have the downside of being able to, you can play around it, but that's the thing about secrets, you never know which one, your opponent never knows which one you've played, so they can't play around everything. So really cool idea, and actually the effect 1 mana, like if it was just 1 minion on the board, you wouldn't pay 1 mana to give a minion +2 health. Not necessarily. You can get some efficient trades potentially, but this has the potential to scale, and I think if it hits more than 1 minion, then I think it's already worth it. And next up, moving on to some dragon synergy for Paladin, which I'm quite excited about. I do like dragons. This one is called Dragon Speaker. So it's not a dragon itself, but it's a 5-mana 3/5, so terrible stats for 5 mana. Not terrible, but not great. Battlecry, give all dragons in your hand +3/+3. That is a pretty big buff effect. We've seen a lot of other buff effects giving your minions +2/+2. Giving a minion +3/+3 is pretty great, because let's just say there's 1 dragon in your hand. You play this, that's 5 mana for 8/6 in stats, so that's pretty good. The problem is though, and the problem that's always been with buff cards, is they're a bit slow. Hand buff cards, that is, anyway, because you then have to play that dragon as well with the buff. So obviously you're looking to hit more than 1 dragon with this, and maybe with some of the healing that Paladin has got, we talked about it previously, but we saw really in Rastakhan's Rumble that Paladin's got some huge potential for healing now. So maybe they can afford to be a little bit slower, heal back up with these big dragons, you know, play a big dragon that's got +3/+3, and then give it lifesteal. That's something that can really, really help this class. So An interesting one, hand buff cards like this haven't actually worked in the past because they've been too slow. Yes, you can situationally make it work, but as a consistent deck, not really. So it'd be really interesting to see what kind of support they get. And this next card does actually support it quite well. And this one is called the Bronze Herald. It's a dragon itself, so it can be buffed. But it's a 3-mana 3/2 dragon. So stats a little bit weak, but the Death Rattle does have a number of advantages. It makes your hand bigger. That is important if you're playing a buff deck. 2, it's really good because it synergizes the dragons in your hand. It synergizes with the previous card to give those dragons +3/+3, and they will only be 4 mana. And finally, it works well with other dragon synergy cards. So a lot of dragons require you to have another dragon in your hand. Well, this is one way to do that. You play this and it gives you 2 more dragons in your hand, so it can work with Crowd Roaster and the Cathedral Gargoyle, which is a paladin only card. You really want to play the Cathedral Gargoyle on turn 2, but if you've got this in your hand, then it qualifies. Then you get 2 more dragons, you can buff those, etc, etc. So some pretty neat synergy there. I don't think what they've got right now is going to be strong enough to make a deck, but hopefully we'll see some more neutral dragons and some more paladin dragons, and maybe a legendary that synergizes with dragons in paladin to make this work. But at the moment, it's a nice card to play on 3. Like, you'd be quite happy to play this because 1, it gives you a 4-drop to play. So if you've got nothing else to play, this pretty much guarantees that you'll be able to play a 4-drop. But also, if your 4-drop is a Twilight Drake, then this will buff them because it puts 2 more cards back in your hand, and it will buff the health on your Twilight Drake when you play it on turn 4. So a pretty nice card, actually. We'll see how it goes with this new buff dragon mechanic. Next up, let's look at some Druid cards, and this one's a pretty interesting card. It's called Crystal Stag. It's epic. It costs 5 mana. It's 4 attack and 4 health, and it is a beast. It also has Rush, and it has the Battle Cry. If you've restored 5 health this game, summon a copy of this. Now, firstly, let's assume you can meet that requirement. Summoning a copy of this is very good. 5 mana, 8/8 in stats is going to be really good. Not only 8/8 in stats, but 8/8 with Rush. So this is a really, really strong play at any point in the game, really. If you play this on turn 5, it's going to be really strong. If you can play it a bit later on, then you might need to trade them both into a big minion, but it's a very good play for 5 mana. The issue is, can you actually make this work? Druid hasn't been much of a healing class of late. They've been more about gaining armor, but they're losing a lot of those cards, and the class is going to be changing a little bit. And they do have Healing Touch, which is 3 mana, restore 8 health. That, all you have to do is play that, and then you can make this work. But to be honest, that's not a very good card. It's a very, very good healing card, but it doesn't impact the board much. And are you actually going to be, if you were to play this on turn 5, are you going to have a target where you can actually heal 8 health, or at least 5 to activate this? So at the moment, it doesn't really work. There's Earthen Ring Farseer that you could put into a Druid deck, but that's not a sort of card you really want to be in your deck unless you're struggling for health or you have some kind of health synergy. So potentially it could go into this. But if we move on to the next card, this is another new one which does synergize with that, and kind of looks like they're leaning towards a heal Druid archetype, which isn't in the game currently, so it could be quite interesting. This is called Crystal Power, and it's a 1 mana spell, and it's a 1 mana choose 1 spell. So instantly this is quite nice. Choose 1 spells are always pretty good in Druid because you can adapt it to the situation you're in, which is really, really important. And this one has choose 1, deal 2 damage to a minion, or restore 5 health. Now, the restore 5 health is also to a minion, so you can't restore 5 health to your face. But the 2 effects for 1 mana are very good. Both of these cards you can get in the Priest class. There's also Arcane Shot in Hunter, which is 1 mana, deal 2 damage. And just being able to have that flexibility is very strong. And both cards are quite nice in their own right. But if you need to restore 5 health to activate your Crystal Stag, you have to have a minion that has been that has lost at least 5 health, because if you play this on a minion that's only lost 2 health, it doesn't count as restoring 5 health. So you might need to play a couple of these to actually activate your Crystal Stag. We might have to see some other cards. You might need to be playing Earthen Ring Farseer. So at the moment, it doesn't really look like a deck. The Crystal Stag, although I've just said a really strong, powerful play, it's not a game-winning play. It's a very strong tempo play, which can set you on the path to win it, but you do have to support it with other cards. So I think we need to see a lot more before we can assess whether this heal Druid will be successful. But this final card does make Druid better, and you could use it along with the Crystal Power. This is Keeper Staladris, I think is how you pronounce it. It's a 2-mana 2/3 minion. So 2 mana is very, very cheap for a card like this, because it has, after you cast a choose one spell, add copies of both choices to your hand. So, for example, if you used it with the Crystal Power, you play Keeper Staladris for 2 mana. Then for 1 mana you play Crystal Power, you get the effect of Crystal Power, whichever one you choose, and then you get 2 more copies of Crystal Power in your hand, one that does 2 damage and one that restores 5 health. So that is already setting you on the path to being able to restore 5 health quite easily, because then you could have had at least 2 Crystal Powers used. And this card only costs 2 mana, so you can chain it with so many other different cards. Other choose one cards, the Starfall, 5 damage to a minion or 2 damage to all minions. That's pretty awesome. If you've got this on the board, you want to do 2 damage to all minions. You then get a deal 5 damage and deal 2 more damage to all minions back in your hand that you can play again later. Because Starfall's not the most powerful AoE, but if you can cast it twice, then maybe you can get the effect that you want. So, a very strong card. Fandral Staghelm was in the game previously, and that was more expensive than this card. It was a very, very strong card at the time. Really good. But it was more expensive. This one having the flexibility of being 2. I think if you're going to be playing any choose one spells in any kind of Druid deck, I think it's worth putting this in there. Maybe we'll see a choose one twin spell, which would mean that you play the twin spell, you choose one, get a copy of that card back, and then you get a copy of both cards back from Keeper Staladris. So yeah, there's lots of good possibilities here. This is a very strong legendary for Druid, and one that if you opened it, I think you'd be able to find a deck to put this in. It's not one of these cards that you have to shoehorn into a single deck. I think a lot of Druid decks would be able to play this, just because the choose one effect's so strong for Druid. Next up, let's take a look at Hunter. And this one I think is a pretty decent card as well. This is called Unleash the Beast. It's a rare card and it's a 6 mana spell, and it's a twin spell, so it will get 2 copies of it. One when you play it, another one comes back into your hand. Summon a 5/5 Wyvern with Rush. So Rush is a really powerful mechanic. When applied to any kind of a minion with decent attack, it's very strong. And I think paying 6 mana for a 5/5 minion isn't great, but 6 mana 5/5 for a minion with Rush is pretty good, and then having the extra effect of being able to play exactly the same one the next turn is pretty decent. Now Spell Hunter is going to look very different when the rotation happens, so there's so many cards that are rotating out, so they do have a space for this in a potential Spell Hunter if that's something that happens. It's a way that you can summon minions without having minions in your deck, and we saw that being very powerful with the Spell Hunter across Rastagan's Rumble, and actually, to be honest, probably across the last 3 or 4 expansions, Spell Hunter's been quite good. So this one is something that, if Spell Hunter is good enough, then yes, you can play this. It's a lot like a Springpaw. So Springpaw is a 1 mana 1/1. It has Rush and it adds another exactly the same copy of the card into your hand. So it does a very similar thing. It's just an efficient removal for Hunter without having to use more than 1 card, to be honest. So I quite like it. We'll have to see how Hunter kind of shakes out to see if this will be something that they can fit in their deck. Which leads us on to the next card called Verissa Windrunner. It's a 7 mana, 5 attack, 6 health minion, which is legendary, and it has Battlecry equipped, Thoradal the Star's Fury. This is a weapon that has 2 attack, 3 durability. I think I'll just flash that up for you now. After your hero attacks, gain spell damage +2 this turn. So the spell damage doesn't stack in the game at the moment. Maybe there will be a gonk that you can get in Hunter, but I doubt it. I really don't think so. But yeah, so on your turn that you attack with this, you can get +2 spell damage. Now this is a really powerful effect, because being able to get spell damage on demand can really, really be very impactful. Any of your spells having +2 spell damage is really good, but the problem is that this isn't really a class that really would make the best use of it. I think if this sort of card was in Mage, it would be really overpowered, because they've got so many good quality spells that they can make use of this in. Like, imagine using this on a Blast Wave, it would be so much better. But Hunter does have some ways. There are a lot of spells in Hunter that could benefit from this, and you kind of think with spell damage, oh, maybe it'll be an OTK type thing, but I really don't see that happening. It's more of a control card that you could use to help Hunters sort of control cards or removal cards kind of step up a bit. And when you look at the cards I'm referring to, Baited Arrow, for example, would work very well with this. Deal 3 damage, overkill, summon a 5/5 Devil Saw. Well, deal 5 damage makes it much easier to overkill. Multi-Shot is a 4 mana, deal 3 damage to 2 random enemy minions. That becomes much better. Wing Blast, of course, will be increased from 4 damage to 6. Kill Command is one that you could use to kill your opponent with, but that would only increase from 5 to 7, so is it going to be enough? Well, with Hunter usually it is, to be honest, so maybe a Kill Command to the face, that could work. Then there's Bomb Toss. So they do have a few kind of cards still in the game, but I would expect we'll probably see some more spells introduced into this expansion that would work with this, because at the moment, is Control Hunter really going to be worth it? I don't know. Maybe you could put this in the Mech Hunter with Oblivitron as a way to kind of control the board before you get Oblivitron effects to work. So it's an interesting legendary, but not one that I think is overpowered. Like, the stats when you play it isn't that great. The minion's pretty weak. Yes, you do get a 2-attack weapon, so potentially you could have a bit more of an impact on the board that turn, but it's one that we're going to have to see in action again. It's not, looking at this now, it doesn't seem like it's going to blow anyone away. It just seems like if you played it, you could get some efficient plays with a decent weapon. But the problem is, as this is a weapon effect, really, no one cares about the minion, because Varese is just not a very strong minion. If this becomes very good and the deck becomes very good, people will start running Ooze. But Hunter does have the advantage of being able to play other weapons, so that potentially your opponent will have to use the Ooze earlier. We'll see, but an interesting card nonetheless. Next up for Priest, we've got Mass Resurrection, which is a 9 mana spell, so very expensive, but it summons 3 friendly minions that died this game. So it doesn't say different minions, so you can summon 2 of the same minion, which is quite interesting, or if you get the same minion to die 3 times, then you could summon 3 copies of the same minion. So you could potentially get 3 Prophet Valens, 3 Malagoses, just depending on how you can get them out of your deck. There is one way you can get copies out of your deck, because Xeric's Cloning Gallery is not rotating out of the game. That will still be around, so that's also a 9 mana spell. But Resurrect Priest is going to go through some changes for sure, because they're losing Eternal Servitude, which is a huge part of that deck. And they're also losing Radiant Elemental, which is the one that reduces the cost of your spells, which also makes the OTK combo much harder. Now, I don't really like this card. I think it's got potential to be very good, but the potential, we've seen this Resurrect Priest deck, is what I'm trying to say. I don't really want to see it again. If somebody comes up with a combo which just is a turn 9 OTK, then it's just going to be annoying, because we've already lived through that. I like the way that it does cost 9 mana, because it's a bit fairer, and 3 minions, you know, it could summon any minions. You don't know, you still have to work around to make it summon the ones that you want. But there is kind of one combo you could use. You could have Malagos, Prophet Valen, and Arcanine Soul Priest for 9 mana, and then you can play Regenerate, which is a 0 mana healing spell, but because the Arcanine Soul Priest is on the board, it can deal damage. That would deal 16 damage, and if you had 2 of those in your hand, then you can do 32 damage to your opponent's face. But that does require you to have only played Malagos, Prophet Valen, and an Arcanine Soul Priest. And decks where you play no minions can be quite difficult. So it'll be interesting to see how this one progresses. But to be honest, I just don't want Resurrect Priest to be replaced with this one. But that's just me. Next up is a card that I think is very good. This is the Evil Conscriptor. It's a 2 mana 2/2 with a Death Rattle, add a Lackey to your hand. So there was a 2-mana 2/2 death rattle called the Undercity Huckster, which we did have in Rogue, very different class. But that was a really good card, a really good thief card. This Evil Conscriptor, if you're playing a Lackey Synergy deck, then this card can be very good because obviously you want lackeys in your hand. You don't know what lackey you're going to get, it's only going to give you one, but you've got a rough idea that you're going to be getting a 1-mana 1/1 minion with a decent battle cry. So that's pretty good. If you're playing any kind of tempo deck, then this is going to be quite a good card to go into it. The 2-mana 2/2 isn't the best stat line, but just having that death rattle of giving you a lackey is quite nice. I do quite like it. We'll just have to see what kind of support Priest gets to support the lackeys, basically, because it's not the kind of card that you would want to put in your deck if there isn't any Death Rattle synergies or any lackey synergies. Next up, moving on to Warlock, we've got Evil Genius, another lackey card, and this one's very, very good. Another 2-mana 2/2 card. It has the battle cry of destroy a friendly minion and add 2 random lackeys to your hand. So if you're playing a zoo deck, this should be quite good. One, because you're getting 2 smaller minions into your hand that you can play onto the board for tempo, but 2, because you should have other minions that you don't mind necessarily sacrificing to get this effect. It's a downside killing your own minion, but Warlock always finds ways to get around that. Some of the big plays like Cabal Lackey, for example, that's rotating out, but there are ways that you can do this. Any type of eggs are really good for you to use this on. So Scarab Egg will still be in the game. That's a really good zoo deck card. Put the egg on the board, play this, summon the 1/1s, and then the 1/1s could synergize potentially with Grim Rally, which is another card that has to destroy a minion, give your other minions +1/+1. It would also synergize with the scheme, Rafaam scheme in Warlock, which summons 1/1 imps, because 1/1 imps you don't mind killing to get a good effect, like adding 2 random lackeys to your hand. So it can be really good, definitely in a zoo deck, and Warlock always finds ways to get around killing their own minions and actually turning it into a positive. So I quite like this one. It will be pretty decent. Next, we've got a really interesting legendary for Warlock. Not one that I see too much synergy with right now, but it's Fell Lord Betrug. It's a legendary that costs 8 mana, 5/7, and it is a demon, which could be important. So it's very expensive, but it does have a very powerful effect of whenever you draw a minion, summon a copy with Rush that dies at the end of the turn. So this has a couple of implications. Firstly, if you play this on turn 10, you can tap with it. So if you could play this turn 8, on turn 10, 8 mana, play this, tap, draw a huge minion, it has Rush, you can trade it in and then it dies. Maybe it has a Death Rattle and then you get the Death Rattle effect, but you still keep the copy of that card that you drew, so you can still play that minion again the next turn. Is that effect powerful enough to play such a weak body? Yes, if you get it right. You can never guarantee that you're going to draw a minion that you really want to have this on. There's cards like Solarium, which has huge potential, but the problem with Solarium is not only would the minion die on the board, it would also die in your hand, because if you played this on turn 8, then played Solarium for 1 mana, you draw 3 cards, you might summon 3 minions with Rush, that's pretty good. Maybe they've got Death Rattle, that's pretty good, but then the Solarium would discard those cards at the end of your turn and you wouldn't be able to play them. If this card survived 1 turn and then you had a full 10 mana the next turn to play Solarium, yes, maybe it would be a bit more worthwhile. Obviously it synergizes with the Warlock's hero power very well, but it's going to be very difficult to draw exactly the cards you want to make this work with. But I like it. I think it's really cool. It's got a really cool effect. It will create those cool moments where you summon something huge, like Mecha'thun, for example, because if it gives you a copy of Mecha'thun in your hand, it doesn't matter if Mecha'thun dies if you're playing a Mecha'thun Warlock, because you still have the Mecha'thun in your hand to complete your combo later on, and you would just get a huge 10/10 with Rush. So it's quite nice. I can't really see the deck for it right now, though. I mean, maybe Hakar? Maybe Hakar would be very good, actually. We'll see. But yeah, definitely one I'm going to try and work with. Moving on to Shaman now, and we've got the Walking Fountain, which is an 8 mana, 4 attack, 8 health elemental with Lifesteal, Rush, and Wind Fury. This is a very expensive minion, but one which I think is pretty good. there is... Shaman is losing Healing Rain, so they're going to need some lifesteal. Potentially, there might be some other spells. They do have Omega Mind, which wasn't really played very much. Potentially, it could see play in the new expansion, but this is just a really nice card. I don't underestimate lifesteal and rush, and the reason is Ziliax. Ziliax was just so strong. Yes, it comes out on turn 5, which is bit of a huge advantage over this, because this card isn't necessarily an anti-aggro card. Yes, it works very well against aggro, but if you can make it to turn 8, this is less of an anti-aggro card, more of a control shaman card that just gives you that extra bit of healing if you need it. You could put a rock biter on this and give it extra attack for extra lifesteal too. So the fact that it's got lifesteal, rush and wind fury can be really good. The issue is playing on turn 8. If your opponent's minions have got more than an 8 attack, then you're only going to get 1 kind of lifesteal out of it, and then it's only going to do 4 damage. So it's not very strong against late game minions, but it is very strong against other minions that might still be on the board or have been played late game. So if it's against smaller kind of decks, then yes, you can get some good value out of this. I think potentially for 8 mana though, I would prefer it to have 10 health. Maybe that's a bit too greedy, maybe that's a bit too powerful. I'm just a little bit worried about how it might die quite quickly. But just any minion with rush and lifesteal is going to have some potential. So this is one to keep an eye on, to be honest. I think Control Shaman in particular would quite like this card. And next we've got Muck Morpher. It's an epic card, a really, really cool card. 5 mana, 4 attack, 4 health. And it has the battle cry of transform it into a 4/4 copy of a different minion in your deck. So this isn't a good card to put in any deck, to be honest, because then you're just getting a 5 mana 4/4. But what it does do is give you the ability to cheat out the effects of some other minions. So Malagos, for example, any Death Rattle or any strong Death Rattle you might want to put onto this, or any permanent effects you might want to put onto this. So it has potential, but you do have to build your deck around it. And then once you've built your deck around it, you have to draw this card before you draw the card that you want to make a copy of. So these kind of cards don't often become very consistent, but you can put 2 copies of this in your deck because it's an epic. So maybe you could put this in a Hakar deck. I'm seeing lots of good ideas for Hakar decks. Maybe it's a bad idea, but it would work with Hakar if you put him out early. With his Death Rattle just to be a 4/4. So it's got some interesting options, and it's going to be a lot of fun to play with, but is it going to be competitive enough? It really depends. And I think there's probably too much randomness for it to be that special. And finally for Shaman, we've got the Sludge Slurper, which I think this is an effective 1 mana card. It's got 2 attack and 1 health, and it's a Murloc. So that's decent for a Murloc. Being able to play a Murloc on turn 1 if you are playing a Murloc deck is very good. And it has the Battle Cry, add a Lackey to your hand, and Overload 1. So the Overload seems like quite a big downside, and it is. Playing on turn 1 and then losing half of your mana for the next turn is a big deal, but being guaranteed to be able to play a Lackey that next turn gives you a guaranteed play on turn 2, which is pretty huge. Whenever you're overloading mana, you really have to consider what you're going to do next turn. Well, if you play this on turn 1, you've always got to play, and the Lackeys should be pretty strong. They've got some pretty good battle cries. If you play this on turn 1, your opponent plays their minion, then you potentially get the Lackey that has the battle cry of deal 2 damage. You can see how your board is already getting quite nice, and you haven't lost too much tempo from that play. So if you're playing a Lackey synergy deck, then yes, this would be great. If you draw this late game, then it can still be played because you're only overloading 1 mana and you're getting a Lackey in your hand, which can also be played on the same turn. So this is a really nice Murloc. I don't know whether Murloc Shaman will be any good. Obviously they're losing their quest, which isn't really that sad because no one played it in the first place. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see it. But I don't think the fact that this is a Murloc means it has to go into a Murloc deck. I think you could play this in any deck, any kind of Shaman deck that works with battle cries, or maybe just wants some good tempo. I think it's pretty nice. It's not as good as a Firefly, for example. If you compare it to a Firefly, on turn 1 you would play the Firefly, then you get another Firefly back in your hand. Well, this gives you a Lackey back in your hand. but you would still have 2 mana to spend on the next turn with the Firefly. So there's positives and negatives for both, but this is a nice 1-drop for Shaman, I think, and being able to overload is great for Shaman in certain instances if you've got Lickham equipped, especially. Lickham's a really, really good weapon. You just need to get overloaded. Well, this is another good way to do that. So I quite like this card. We'll see if it fits into Shaman. So let's move on to neutral minions here, and starting with Hecklebot. This is a 4 mana rare card with Taunt that has 3 attack and 8 health, and it's also a mech. So really, really strong stats for a 4 mana play, but it has the downside of Battlecry. Your opponent summons a minion from their deck. So that's pretty bad, but I really like this card. I think this is awesome. It's got the effect of kind of like the Dirty Rat. So if you're playing against a combo deck and you can cheat out their Malygos early, maybe not in a Resurrect deck, but any other kind of deck, if they've got some big combo minions, if you can cheat them out early, that's a good way for you to beat that deck and win the game. That's quite hard to do, obviously, but the fact that it's a Battlecry is pretty decent rather than this being a Death Rattle, because if you played this first, you've still potentially got 6 mana left over to deal with the big minion that they summon, or they might even summon just a weak minion. It might even be just a 1-drop that they summon. So this is a combo disruptor, really. It can pull out strong Battlecry minions from your opponent's deck so they don't get that Battlecry effect. Maybe like the new Togwaggle comes out and it kind of ruins a lot of their play, so it could be quite good. But it's also a really good anti-aggro card, because if you're playing against an aggro deck, a lot of the time they're playing cheaper, faster minions. If you can play this on turn 4, then not only are you kind of protecting yourself, but they might summon a weak minion out, maybe a 1, 2 or 3 drop, so it actually makes it still worthwhile. Yes, there will always be downsides when you play a card like this. Yes, you will summon some awful cards, some big Death Rattle cards, which will just make you lose the game potentially. But I quite like Hecklebot. I like this kind of style of card, being able to disrupt combo decks and maybe even help you strong against aggro decks. But it's got a bit of a big trade-off, so maybe you'd have to kind of consider it at the right time. I mean, if you're playing against a Mechathune deck as well, maybe you play this and you pull out their Mechathune. It just, it just ruins the game for them. Next up, we've got the Hench Clan Hogsteed. This is a 2 mana 2/1 beast which has Rush, and it also has Death Rattle, summon a 1/1 Murloc. This is a pretty nice card, actually, for a neutral card. Yes, it does synergize in Murloc decks, so summoning a Murloc can synergize with other Murlocs, but the fact that you're, for 2 mana, having 2 damage, pretty decent. So it's basically a 2 damage to an opponent's minion, and then have a 1/1 left over. So in certain situations it could be good. It's a beast, so it can synergize with lots of other beast cards in Hunter, for example. I'm not so sure that'll be too much of an upside, but it does synergize with the Timberwolf, for example. But I like this. Pretty good, not overpowered, but pretty good, solid neutral minion. Now, moving on to one of my favourite cards revealed so far, kind of. It's called Geppetto Joybuzz. He's 8 mana, 6/6 in stats. So we've seen a lot of legendaries which high expense and low stats. So the effect's got to be good. And yes, the effect is good here. And the battle cry is draw 2 minions from your deck and set their attack and health and cost to 1. So what you're looking for here is you're looking to draw 2 minions. So firstly you get a shot at 2. So if you're looking for one particular minion, you've got 2 chances of getting it. But you're looking for ones with very strong battle cries, and you're looking for Death Rattles. Very strong Death Rattles. Or Malygos. Malygos is always something that you're looking for. Which I think is why they didn't rotate Malygos into the Hall of Fame, to be honest, because I think it might be about time for him. But anyway, this gives you some really good possibilities of being able to get out some minions with huge, heavy discounts. So the problem with Malygos is he costs 9 mana. The fact that he's 4 attack and 12 health doesn't really matter. You just want to put him on the board. Well, if you've suddenly got him as a 1 cost minion, that just opens up huge combo possibilities. So this isn't going to work very often, though, because it's very, unless you built a deck that has mostly spells and just a few minions, it's going to be difficult to get this to work. And you can't rely on it as a combo because this is a legendary, so you can only put one in there. So, you know, 50% of the time you're going to draw your Malygos first. So it kind of would work quite well in big death rattle decks that you're playing. Now, it does draw 2 minions from your deck. It doesn't draw copies of the minions. So if you were to draw minions that don't have good death rattles, maybe you draw a big taunt that you've got in your deck, then unfortunately it's just a 1/1, so that is a downside. So you're looking for very specific things with this card. But I could see this work quite well in Rogue. So, for example, this would work pretty decently with a Pogo Hopper deck. So if you've already played a bunch of Pogos, you've shuffled them all into your deck, this is a good way to draw them, because it doesn't matter that they got reduced to 1 mana 1/1s, because they'll get the battle cry of increased health depending on how many Pogo Hoppers you played before, and attack of course. So it could work quite well in a deck like that, because that is the problem with Pogo Hoppers. Once they're all in your deck, you don't have any to play. And this is 8 mana, so on turn 10 you could play both cards that you draw. So I think that could be a pretty decent way to do that. Could also work with Myra's Unstable Element, because you can draw your whole deck, then you can play the minion you want to draw with Geppetto, then you can prep out maybe the Togwaggle Scheme to shuffle that minion into your deck, and then when you play Geppetto you're guaranteed to get that minion. That's all very convoluted though, that doesn't really seem like a very sensible play to me, but there's lots of possibilities. I think this will be a lot of fun working out how to make this work. Then finally for today, we've got a pretty vanilla minion. This is a travelling healer, so potentially this could go into the heal druid deck that we talked about before. But do you want to play this over an Earthen Ring Farseer, which is a 3 mana 3/3? This is a 4 mana 3 attack 2 health Divine Shield minion with the battle cry of restore 3 health. So it's a good way to bring healing to classes that don't have healing, because it's a neutral minion. So in Rogue, if you played this with Spirit of the Shark, then yes, you can heal yourself much better. But again, you probably just want to play the Earthen Ring Farseer. This is a better minion than Earthen Ring Farseer because it does have the same attack and the Divine Shield. I just think the extra mana cost might make it less versatile and probably not one that you want to put in your deck. But if you're running heal synergies, maybe you could run both. Maybe it's important to play in those sort of classes to have more readily available healing. Probably just pack filler though, to be honest. Alright guys, well that's all the cards. It was a long video today because I had a lot to get through, but there will be more revealed tomorrow, so I'll be back again with some more reviews for you. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.